Good day everyone, I'm Jenna Jean Simargas and today I'm going to discuss the social history. So what is social history? It is a field of history that looks at the lived experience of the past. It is the study of ordinary people, their everyday lives, and the practices of the rituals that constitute this. So before the arrival of the Spanish colonizers in the Philippines in the 16th century, the barangays were organized independent villages, and in some cases, cosmopolitan sovereign principalities which functioned much like a city-state. The barangay was the dominant organizational pattern among indigenous communities in the Philippine archipelago. In essence, social history is the historian's concerns growth beyond the actions of social and political leaders. The analyst school was a pioneer in the 1920s when it comes to focusing on the larger social and economic processes and looking at them over a long period of time that expands centuries. So the analyst school is a group of historians associated with the style of historiography developed by the French historians in the 20th century to stress long-term social history. Social history aims to narrate the experiences of minority groups that were seen as outsiders by mainstream society. So in this lesson, we tackled three social groups that have been viewed as outsiders by mainstream society. So first is the Filipino woman who had as much right to concern herself with political issues but was relegated by the patriarchal colonial rule. So in every era when oppression and injustice occurred, Filipino women did not only remain the victims of patriarchy and gender inequality. Instead, they joined men in larger conflicts and collaborated on the causes that were specifically related to their experiences as women. The Philippine women's movement as it is today, it is a result of prior struggles in which Filipino women took part but were not given enough credit. So Spanish colonizers and the Catholic Church ruled over the Philippines. Women were no longer permitted to assume powerful positions or engage in political activities. Second is the ethnic Chinese and Chinoy. So, ang Chinese and Chinoy is sila ang the most important people sa Philippine economy in that time because ang Chinese ang nagsettled clause sa Spanish government to secure such as jobs, foods, retail traders, and artisans which no one else could monopolize. And the third is the indigenous peoples and ethnic minorities. So, in this section, ang mga IPs ay hindi binibigyan ng plataporma upang ipahayag ang kanilang kalagayan sa ibang bahagi ng bansa. Kung minsan ay dahil sa mga preemptive biases na hawak ng mga mababatas at mga gumagawa ng patakaran.
Women history. It must be emphasized that Filipino women did not merely remain victims of patriarchy and gender inequality, but that in every period when oppression and injustice took place, they fought alongside men in broader struggles and fought together for causes that were specific to their experiences as women. The women's movement in the Philippines in its present form was a product of earlier struggles participated by Filipino women who were not given due attention. The Spanish colonization. At the onset of Spanish colonization, natives resisted that imposed way of life by the colonizers. One of the methods of native resistance was the abandonment of the pueblo to go back to their old ways of life. Sa pagsisimula ng kolonisasyon ng mga Espanyol ay dinabanan ng mga katutubo ang ipinataw na paraan ng pamumuhay ng mga kolonisador. Isa sa mga paraan na paglalaban ng mga katutubo ay ang pag-abandono sa pueblo upang bumalik sa dati nilang pamumuhay. At pinamumunuan ito ng babaylan. Ang babaylan ay galang at sinusunod ng mga tao para sa kanilang karunungan, kahit na sinubukan ng mga kolonyal na otoridad na siraan sila. Maraming mga babaylan ang lumaban sa spiritual na paglilinis na ginawa ng mga parili, kahit na nangungulugan ito ng panlipunang pagbubukod sa ilang mga punto. Inumbinsi nila ang kanilang mga tao na ang mga diwata at anito ay nangako sa kanila ng katubusan at kalayaan mula sa mabigat na tributo at malupit na pirasang paggawa kung aalisin nila ang pueblo, sunugin ang mga amaheng katoliko at patayin ang mga praile. Babaylan. Ang mga Pilipinong shaman na karaniwang kilala bilang babaylan ay mga salamangkero ng iba't ibang grupong etniko ng pre-kolonyal na mga isla ng Pilipinas. Ang mga shaman na ito ay dalubhasa sa pakikipag-usap, pagpapatahimik o paggamit sa mga espiritu ng mga patay at sa espiritu ng kalikasan. Sila ay halos mga babae o mga pababae na lalaki, asog o bayok. Sila ay pinaniniwalaang may mga gabay sa espiritu kung saan maaari silang makipag-ugnay at makipag-ugnayan sa mga espiritu ng Diyos, mga anito o diwata. At sa daigdig ng mga espiritu, ang kanilang pangunahing tungkulin ay bilang mga daluyan sa panahon ng mga ritual ng pag-anito. Mayroon ding iba't ibang subtype ng mga babaylan na dalubhasa sa sining ng pagpapagaling at pag-herbalism, pagmuhula at pangkukulam. A typical example of babaylan-led revolt was the Tamblot uprising in 1622. Tamblot was a babaylan despite being known as a male. This fact can be confusing, but there are two possible explanations. First, historian Zeus Salazar argued that men could become a babaylan if they look like a woman. Naniniwala ang mga sinaunang Pilipino na ang kakayahang makipag-usap sa mga Diyos ay nakakalaan para sa mga babae o lalaki na may katangiang pababae. Some historians contended that Tamblot was not a babaylan per se but was a descendant of one. Hence, he was still perceived by the community as someone with spiritual prowess or ability. In one of the earliest revolts that he led in Bohol in the early 17th century, Tamblot told his people that a Diwata appeared before him and promised that he would live in abundance and prosperity and be free from tributes and forced labor if they rise against the Spaniards and reject the Catholic faith. Dahil sa mga pangakong ito ay umaalingaw sa mga tao at sa kanilang mga karanasan, 2,000 buhalano ang bumangon sa pag-aalsa, sinunog ang mga nayon at simbahan at tinapon ang kanilang mga rosaryo at krus at sinira ang imahe ng Birheng Maria. Inabot ng mahigit 1,000 taon mula sa kolonyal na pamahalaan ang pagpigil sa pag-aarsang ito. The Katipunan was formed and the revolution started. Women took up integral roles in the struggle. The Katipunan, despite being a predominantly male organization, accepted women members and established a women's chapter. Si Josefa Rizal ang nahalal na pangulo ng nasabing kabanata. Si Gregorio de Jesus naman ay maraming beses na nailagay ang kanyang buhay sa panganib dahil lang sa pagtupad ng kanyang tungkulin bilang katipunera. At si Marina Dizon naman ang nagsinigawa sa initiation rates ng mga babaeng aplikante sa katipunera. Iningatan nila ang mga talaan ng mga organisasyon at tinangunuhan ang orientasyon para sa mga bagong membro. Ang kasapian ng kabanata ng kababaihan ay limitado lamang sa malapit na kamag-anak ng mga katipunero, marahil bilang pag-iingat dahil sa lihim at iligal na katanggihan na organisasyon noong panahong iyon. Melchora Aquino, who provide food and medicine to the exhausted and embattled katipuneros. The courage and selflessness of Tanang Sora, shown in her outer willingness to assist an illegal organization, were heroic. However, it should be emphasized that women in that time of the revolution were not limited to the rules outside the battlefield. Indeed, several women exhibited skills in the battle and combat and rose in the ranks of the revolution hierarchy. Maraming kababaihan ang nagpakita ng mga kasanayan sa labanan at tumaas sa hanay ng revolusyon. Si Teresa Magbanwa na namuno sa mga revolusyasyong hukbo sa Capiz. Si Trinidad Tixon naman ang nagtatag ng kabanata ng kababaihan ng Katipunan at nagkaroon ng reputasyon sa kanyang husay sa larangan ng digmaan. At si Agueda Kahabaga naman na kinala bilang isang babaeng unang general ng Republika at mabangis na lumaban. Ilan sa mga hindi kilalang katipunera na lumaban kasama ang mga kalalakihan at kung minsan ay martir sa labanan ay sina Marcela Marcelo alias Silang Bagsik, Valeriana Elis at Gregoria Montoya. Nobody can deny that the women's experience is unique and distinct from that of men because of the patriarchal status. Both the opportunities of women and the spheres where they could thrive and lead were limited. Two kinds of response could be observed in these moments. The first response was to make the most out of space allowed to them, despite the existence of women soldiers who fought alongside men in actual combat. Many maintained the view of the women's place was not in the battlefield. A lot of women concurred with this. The instead initiated organizations such as the Association Philanthropica de la Cruz Roja or the Philanthropic Association of Red Cross. The objective of Roja Cross was to collect funds for the wounded soldiers and war victims. Sumunod na dekada ng siglo, mas isinulong ng mga kababaihang Pilipino ang feminist na henerasyon sa mga suffragists na pangunahing binubuo ng mga kababaihan na nasa itaas at panggitnang uri at nakipaglaban para sa pagpantay-pantay sa politika. Sila ay nagsimula sa artikulasyon ay higit na binigyan din sa panahon ng aktivismo mula 1960s at 1970s. Ang makibaka ay maraming kilusan ng mga kababaihan. Naniwala na ang mga kababaihan ay dapat ding alalahanin ang pagkapantay-pantay sa lipunan at ekonomiya.
Good day everyone, I'm John Paulo Makiling. I'm going to discuss the Chinese in the Philippines. The Philippines has a large population of people of Chinese ancestry. As in Thailand, Chinese in the Philippines have intermarried with Filipino and has largely been assimilated into the population. Chinese language instruction has been restricted since 1973. Many young Filipino-Chinese consider themselves to be more Filipino than Chinese. Chinese settlers near the Spanish government during the Spanish reign were able to obtain jobs as food providers, retail traders, and artisans that no one else could dominate. There were three separate groups engaged in economic activity. The Chinese who provided the capital, the Indians who mostly provided the agricultural labor and materials, and the Chinese mestizo who were either or both. These three were taxed differently, while the Spanish only placed limitations on Chinese political participation, property ownership, and geography mobility. The Spaniards urged the Chinese to become a Christian because they understood how economically significant they were to the Philippines. Chinese men also married indigenous women, which contributed to the rise of the Chinese mestizo populations in the Philippines. Former Government General Dasmariñas gave Binondo to the Chinese in the order to keep them close to but apart from Intramuros. The Dominicans might also spread Christianity in a community that was previously established. Around 1840s, a medical doctor and traveler named John Malott visited the Philippines and she found out the Chinese mestizo expand their commerce. A significant development was establishing a community in Cebu that trade with Leyte and Samar, cacao, coconut oil, and tobacco to the east, Caraga and Misamis, gold, coffee, wax, and cacao to the south, and Negros and Panay, tobacco, sea slugs, and mother of pearl to the west. Negros also had cacao, rice, pearl, fish, wax, and other products. Spanish historian Jose Montero did not mince words when he described the mestizo as the major enemy of Spain, and that the mestizos were considered petty, crafty, and as a citizen disconnected. When a doctor and traveler named Jean Malott visited the Philippines in the 1840s, she learned that Chinese mestizo were expanding their trade, so establishing a settlement in Cebu that traded with Leyte and Samar in the east for cacao, coconut oil, and tobacco, Caraga and Misamis in the south for gold, coffee, wax, and cacao, and Negros and Panay in the west for tobacco, sea slugs, and mother of pearl was a noteworthy development. Other products available in Negros included fish, wax, rice, pearls, and cacao. When he referred to the mestizos as the main enemy of Spain and said that they were concentrated, petty, deceitful, uncitizens, and discontent. The Spanish historian Jose Montero did not hold back. By acquiring the interchain of the Philippine Island in 1898, the United States entered the scene and imposed its colonial laws on the nation. The 1902 Chinese Exclusion Act was a key piece of legislation, or CEA. First, ethnic Chinese people were already prohibited from entering the United States and its territories at the time, as they should be in the Philippines. The newest U.S. position, because the Chinese posed a risk to American economic interest and complicated effort to quell the Filipino rebellion, the CEA was to be put into effect in the Philippines. Brigadier General Arthur MacArthur arrived in the United States in 1902. Congress that the country's formative stage, which is presently in course of evolution. If the Chinese were welcomed there, would soon have direct or indirect control or pretty nearly every productive interest. To the absolute exclusion of Filipinos and Americans, several Chinese guerrilla groups battled the Japanese occupation, and Louis Tarok held them in high regard. The Chinese in the Philippines are currently focused on business pursuits with sporadic political or social endeavors. They are said to have been disfranchised because they were unable to participate in politics, hold office, express opposition, or hold Filipino citizenship. They seem to be apolitically. However, they are Chinese elders or elite who appear to have contracts with the governmental and bureaucratic initiatives. Despite being a minority in the Philippines, the ethnic Chinese have achieved self-sufficiency and actively participated in public affairs. History demonstrates how society has changed as a result of the immigration and economic activities of Chinese mestizos and ethnic Chinese who have assimilated into Filipino society. Both the ethnic Chinese who have not yet naturalized as a Filipino citizens and the Chinoy who are descended from Chinese mestizo and are already citizens of the Philippines may be referred to as Chinese today. They are progressed to become the richest business owners in the nation. They do engage in dynamic and shifting the demographic interaction with one another and the Filipino culture.
Indigenous peoples and ethnic minorities. The plight of Philippine indigenous peoples, or IP, has come to light in the late 20th century with the heightening of the concept of human rights and inclusivity. Plight means struggles or mga unfortunate situation ng ating mga katubo noong mga panahong iyon. Sa paksang ito, subukan nating ilabas ang mga isyong panlipunan na kinakaharap ng mga katubo na ito. Limitado lamang ang mapagkukunang pangkasaysayan tungkol sa mga katubo, ngunit ang mga etnografiya ay nakatulong na ilarawan ang imahe ng mga katubo at kung paano sila napunta sa kasaysayan. Sa pangkalatan, ang mga katubo ay may mga katangi-katangiang tulad ng pag-uusap sa kanilang mga kagtubong wika, mga kultura at relihiyosong gawain at sa espesyal na relasyon sa kanilang mga lupaing ninuno. Sa kasalukuyang pagkikibaka ng mga katubo ay malalim na nakaugat sa kasaysayan. Ang mga pagkikibakang ito ay kailangang tugunan. Pangunahing dahilan ng mga katubo ay hindi binigyan ng plataporma para ipahayag ang kanilang kalagayan sa iba pang bahagi ng bansa dahil sa preemptive biases na hawak ng mga mambabatas at mga gumagawa ng patakaran. Preemptive meaning take action in order to prevent the said event. Tapos, sinabi pa nga ni Francisco Colin na ang Negrillos, Zambales at ibang lugar ay hindi pa mga sibilisado. Sino nga ba si Francisco Colin? Si Francisco Colin ay isang Kastilang misyonaryo na member ng Society of Jesus, historian and educator. Sinabi pa nga ni Francisco Colin na ang Negrillos, Zambales at ibang lugar ay hindi pa mga sibilisado, ngunit nagkaroon ng mas maraming wika dahil halos bawat ilog ay may kanya-kanyang sariling wika. At ang mga grupong ito ay walang isama na nakasulat tungkol sa kanilang reliyon, pamahalaan o kasaysayan maliban na lamang sa kanilang tradisyon na pinanatili at awit na nanatili sa kanilang mga alaala. Sa isang hindi pa napirmahang dokumento noong 1618, inilarawan ng isang Kastila ang mga Negrito bilang kabilang sa parehong lahi ng mga tao na nakatira sa pinakamalayo at pinakamasungit na bahagi at sila ay ang mga Aborigen. Habang iba pang mga katubo ay mga imigrante na sumakop sa kanila. Sila ay malupit at tutol sa sibilasyon dahil madalas nilang pinutol ang ulo ng kanilang sariling ama at kapatid bilang isang libangan. Para sa mga Kastila, ang mga grupong ito ay hindi karapat-dapat na hanapin at i-convert sa Kristyanismo. At muling manirahan sa pamagitan ng reduction. Ang reduction ay ito ay isang relocating, forcing someone or relocation or new settlements or to poblations. Habang naipasa ang Pilipinas sa Estados Unidos, ang partikular na interes sa mga bulubunduking lugar na kung saan nanirahan itong grupo ng mga katutubo at inuri bilang mga di-Kristyanong tribo. Tinawag ng Estados Unidos ang mga grupong ito na Non-Christian Tribes or NCT. Ayon sa 1918 population census, non-Christian tribes totaled around 500,000 sa 10.5 milyong nanirahan sa Pilipinas. Ang pinakamalaging bahagi ng NCT ay makikita sa Sulu at Mindanao, tapos yung sa may Mountain Province at Nueva Vizcaya sa Luzon. At naniniwala ang mga Amerikano na kailangan sila na mapili para sa sibilasyon at politikal. Isang zoologist na si Dean Worcester kumuha ng mga litrato ng indigenous people. Ipinablish niya ito upang ilarawan kung paano kailangan ng mga Pilipino, lalong-lalo na ang mga non-Christian tribe, ang patnubay ng Estados Unidos. In 1905, ang Estados Unidos ay nagpasa ng batas sa pagmimina ng mga sa ating pampublikong lupain. Nilayon nilang paunlarin at isulong ang mga non-Christian tribes sa sibilasyon at nilikha ang Bureau ng Non-Christian Tribes sa pamamagitan ng John's Law Section 22 noong 1917. Layunin ng Bureau na itaguyod sa lahat ng sapat na paraan sa isang sistematikong, mabilis at kumpletong paraan ang moral, material at pang-ekonomiyang pag-unlad, panlipunan at ng mga hindi Kristiyanong Filipino. The Secretary of the Interior ay inangkop ang mga sumusunod na hakbang sa isang closer settlement policy upang itulak ang mga non-Christian tribes na manirahan sa mga organisadong komunidad. Palawakin ang pampublikong paralan, pampublikong kalusugan, pagpalawak ng pampublikong gawain para mapadali ang pag-unlad at pagpalawig ng kontrol ng pamahalaan. Gumawa ng mga kalsada at daanan upang itaguyod ang panlipunan at komersyal at mapanatili ang maayos na ugnayan na sa pagitan ng mga non-Christian tribes at Christian people. Ituloy ang pagpapaunlad ng agrikultura at hingkayatin ang imigrasyon at mamumuhunan ng pribadong kapital sa matabang rehiyon ng Mindanao at Sulu. Ayon sa Bureau, ang Bureau ay nakatutok sa mga Moros sa Mindanao. Tapos hindi nila alam na ang Estados Unidos ay nagpatupad na ng kolonyal na programa sa non-Christian tribes, lalong-lalo na sa Baguio. Di ba ang alam naman natin na ang Baguio ay may malamig na klima at malamig na claim na pwedeng ay summer capital. Tapos pwede doon ang mga US colonial government na pumunta or magbakasyon pag tag-init na sa Pilipinas. Kibalitas, dinisenyo ni Daniel Burnham. Sino ba si Daniel Burnham? Si Daniel Burnham ay isang architecture at urban designer. At dinisenyo niya na kanang ginawa nitong benchmark ang ugnayan na sa pagitan ng mga non-Christian tribes at Christian people. Ituloy ang pagpapaunlad ng agrikultura at hingkayatin ang imigrasyon at mamumuhunan ng pribadong kapital sa matabang rehiyon ng Mindanao at Sulu. Ayon sa Bureau, ang Bureau ay nakatutok sa mga Moros sa Mindanao. Tapos hindi nila alam na ang Estados Unidos ay nagpatupad na ng kolonyal na programa sa non-Christian tribes, lalong-lalo na sa Baguio. Di ba ang alam naman natin na ang Baguio ay may malamig na klima at malamig na klima na pwedeng ay summer capital. Tapos pwede doon ang mga US colonial government na pumunta or magbakasyon pag tag-init na sa Pilipinas. Kibalitas, dinisenyo ni Daniel Burnham. Sino ba si Daniel Burnham? Si Daniel Burnham ay isang architecture at urban designer. At dinisenyo na kanang ginawa nitong benchmark ang lusod para gayahin ng iba. Benchmark means kanang pwede naman siyang i-copy pair with the class, ganun. Tapos ginawa man naman ni Daniel Burnham ang Baguio ng isang benchmark. So di ba dapat makakwarta sila dito pero hindi nakapasok ang mga Amerikano sa bulubunduking bahagi kung saan nanirahan ang mga NCT na magawang mapanatili ang kanilang kultura na pagkakailanlan na may kaunti man or walang bahid ng impluwensya ng banyaga. Ang Commission on National Integration or SCNI in 1957 or Republic Act number 1888 was a turning point. Bakit nga ba sinabing turning point? Dahil mismo ang gobyerno ng Pilipinas ang gumawa ng programang ito. So ang Republic Act number 1888 ay ang isang aksyon upang maisakatuparan sa mas mabilis at kumpletong paraan ang pang-ekonomiyang, panlipunang moral at pampolitika na magsulong ng non-Christian Filipino o national cultural minorities at upang magbigay ng kumpleto at permanenteng pagsasama sa lahat ng sabing pabansang kultura. Ang CNI ay isang programa upang gawing moderno ang kanilang pamumuhay at paunlarin ang kanilang sibilisyon sa infrastruktura. Nag-mention at kung nabasa nyo ang page 212 na mention ng CNI ang rapid at complete, which means na ang mga minorities ay hindi pa na pinagsama-sama at kailangan itong gawin ng mabilis pang-ekonomiya man, panlipunang moral at pampolitika na pagsulong. So dapat jud kanang minadali jud dapat ba kay para jud naanay kanang batas ngayon ani or programa. Ang mga pahayag na ito ay lumikha ng konsepto na kung basahin dito anay nakabutang na uniformity is to be imposed more than diversity, that the minority had to adjust to the majority, na ang ibig sabihin ay pagkakapareho ay dapat ipataw ng hinggit pa sa pagkakaiba-iba, na kailangan mag-adjust ng minorya sa mga nakakarami. 4 na taon ang lumipas simula nang may pasa ang batas na IPRA. Ang IPRA is Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act of 1997 upang kilalanin, protektahan at itaguyod ang mga karapatan ng katutubo sa pamamagitan ng National Commission on Indigenous People. Gayunpaman, sa kabila ng batas ng mga karapatan ng katutubo, nanatili pa rin issue ng mga katutubo siguro dahil ang IPRA ay umira sa modernong paraan. So mo siguro nang dili pagid mawala-wala ang mga issue kay kanang na nakatugod doon sila na og kanang act pero sa moderno nga way ba. Maraming mga dalubhasa sa pag-aaral ng mga katutubo sa hangarin na mapanatili ang kultura at tradisyon ng pamana ng mga katutubo. The National Commission on Indigenous People or NCIP na nilikha sa pamamagitan ng IPRA may tungkulin na protektahan ang mga katutubo mula sa pananaliksik para sa akademiko ay kumuha ng impormasyon upang tapusin ang kanilang thesis at tapos hindi na sila mobalik dito ang para talakayin ug unsay resulta sa mga thesis. Muna wala na gitugot nga himuon og thesis ang kinabuhi sa mga katubo kay pag human og interview sa ilaha wala naman gihapoy kining walay kanang pagbago ba thesis ang tapos pag human sa thesis wala na sila biyaan na sila pag human adto mao nang nakaramdam ang mga katutubo na iba sila sa atin or sa karamihan. Sa kabilang banda, minsan may pinilit ang mga katutubo na ipamalas ang kanilang kultura sa pamamagitan ng pagtatanghal na may pinakamalinis na intensyon at pinapalakas ang paniniwala ng mga katutubo ay iba at hindi kabilang sa kabuuan. Ang isyu ng pagiging tunay ay isa pa ring debate at ang tanging paraan upang tapusin na ito ay ipagpatuloy ang pag-uusap. Ang mga pagkikibaka ng mga tubo ay sa paglipas ng mga siglo ay pagtugon sa mga patakarang idisenyo upang isama ito sa mainstream at pagtapos mawala ng kanilang mahalagang kultura. However, ang higit na nakikita ngayon ay ang kanilang pangkikibaka upang manatili ang kanilang mga ancestral domain na mayaman hindi lamang sa kultura kundi pati na rin sa mineral at mapagkukunan habang unti-unting na nawawala dahil sa interes ng negosyo. Nawala ang kanilang kultura at tradisyon bilang isang mahalagang bahagi ng ating pamana.
So our next topic is about lesson 16, political history. Lesson objectives. By the end of this lesson, the student will be able to define political history and understand the relevance of studying it in the present day, appraise the development of Philippines political history, assess how the government approaches the charter change, election, and peace building today, and propose ways to increase citizen participation in political processes and institutions. Key concepts. Authoritarianism, a form of government where power is centralized usually in a single person and political freedoms are limited. Republic, a state in which the supreme power emanates from the people and their elected representatives or president rather than a monarch. A parliamentary, a system of democratic government where the power is executive, is derived, form, and accountable to the legislature, which is typically parliament, succession, and autonomy. Succession is the withdrawal of a group from a larger political entity, such as a state, while autonomy is the right or condition of self-government. Lesson introduction. Political history focuses on the narrative and the survey of political events, ideas, movement, organs of government,
elections, voters, parties, and leaders. In its essence, political history studies how power is operated within society. These three topics, the evolution of the Philippine Constitution, Philippine election and political parties, and the path to peace in Muslim Mindanao, are the focuses of this lesson. Our first topic is the evolution of the Philippine Constitution. What is Constitution? A Constitution defined as a set of fundamental principles or established precedent according to which a state or organization is governed. Thus, the word itself means to be part of a whole. The coming together of distinct entities into one group with the same principle and ideals. This defines the nature and extent of government. A constitution is a collection of rules and principles which set out how a state will be governed. So, it forms the framework for all the decision of every government official, particularly the legislature or the lawmaking body, executive or the prime president or prime ministers, and the courts. The supreme law of the Republic of the Philippines has been in effect since the 1987, and there were only three other constitutions that have effectively governed the Philippines. So first is the 1935 Commonwealth Constitution, which is the presidency of Manuel L. Quezon. Then 1973 Constitution, which is the reign of Ferdinand Marcos Sr. And the 1986 Freedom Constitution, which is the time of President Cory Aquino. The Constitution of Biak Bato was the provisional constitution of the Philippine Republic during the Philippine Revolution and was publicized by the Philippine Revolutionary government on November 1, 1897. The Constitution was borrowed from Cuba and was written by Isabelo Artaquio and Felix Ferrer into Spanish and it translated it into Tagalog later on. The Biak Bato Constitution of 1887 was also planned by Isabelo Artaquio. The organs of the government under the Constitution were the Supreme Council, which was vested with the power of the Republic and headed by the President and the four department secretaries, the Interior, Foreign Affairs, Treasury, and War. Isabelo Artaquio in the Interior, Antonio Montenegro in Foreign Affairs, Baldemero Aguinaldo in Treasury, and Emiliano Rigo de Dios in War. The Consejo Supremo de Gracia y Justicia, or the Supreme Council of the Grace and Justice, was given the authority to make decisions and affirm or falsify the sentences rendered by other courts and to dictate rules for the administration of justice. The Asamblea de Representantes, or the Assembly of Representatives, which was to be congregated after the revolution to create a new constitution to elect a new council of government and representatives of the people. The constitution of the Biak Bato was never fully implemented since a truce. The Pact of Biak Bato was signed between the Spanish and the Philippine Revolutionary Army. The Biak Bato Constitution provided for establishment of a Supreme Council that would serve as the highest governing body of the Republic. It also outlined basic human rights such as freedom of religion, freedom of the press, right to education. The Pact of Biak Bato was signed on December 15, 1897, created a truce between Spanish colonial Governor General Fernando Primo de Rivera and the revolutionary leader Emilio Aguinaldo to end the Philippine Revolution. The pact was signed in San Miguel, Bulacan, in the house of Pablo Tecson. The next constitution we're about to tackle is the Malolos Constitution, known as the Politica de Malolos. So in 1899, the Malolos Constitution, or the first Philippine Constitution, and the first Republican Constitution in Asia. So the Malolos Constitution was drafted and adopted by the First Philippine Republic, which lasted from 1899 to 1901 during the American occupation. The Philippines was governed by laws of the United States of America. It established a democratic republican government with three branches: the executive, legislative, and the judicial branches. It called for the separation of church and state. The executive powers were to be exercised by the President of the Republic with the help of his cabinet. The Malolos Constitution was patterned after the Spanish Constitution of 1812, with the influences from the charters of Belgium, Mexico, Brazil, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Guatemala, and the French Constitution of 1793. So according to Philippe Calderon, the principal author of the Constitution. These were studied because they shared similar social, political, ethnological, and governance. So the 1899 Malolos Constitution was never enforced due to the ongoing war. So the Philippines was part of the US territory after signing the Treaty of Paris between US and Spain. Then a transfer of sovereignty of the Philippines on December 1898. After the Malolos Constitution, so the next constitution na about sa akin is the Commonwealth Constitution. So after the Treaty of Paris between the America and Spain, the Philippines was subject to the power of the United States. So effectively, a new colonizer of the country was the US from 1898 to 1901. So the Philippines was placed under a military government until a civil government replaced it. Two acts of the U.S. Congress were passed that may be considered to have a qualities of a constitutionality. So these acts is the Philippine Organic Act or the 1902 and the Philippine Autonomy Act of 1916. So the first act was the Philippine Organic Act of 1902, sometimes known as the Philippine Bill of 1902 or the Cooper Act. It was the first organic law of the Philippines enacted by the United States Congress. It provided for the creation of popularly elected Philippine Assembly and specified that legislative power would be vested in a bicameral legislature composed of the Philippine Commission or the upper house and the Philippine Assembly or the lower house. It is the key provision that included a Bill of Rights of the Filipinos and appointment of two non-voting Filipino resident commissioner of the Philippines to represent the Philippines in the United States House of Representatives. The Philippine Autonomy Act of 1916. The Philippine Autonomy Act of 1916, sometimes known as Jones Law, is modified the structure of the Philippine government by removing the Philippine Commission as the legislative upper and replacing it with the Senate elected by Filipino voters, creating the Philippines' first fully elected national legislature. But this act also explicitly stated that it was had always been the purpose of the people of the United States to end their sovereignty over the Philippine Islands and to recognize Philippine independence as soon as stable government can be established therein. So in 1932, with the efforts of the Filipino Independence Mission led by Sergio Osmeña and Manuel Rojas, the U.S. Congress passed the Harry-Hawes-Cutting Act with the premise of the granting Filipino independence. Then the Senate President Manuel L. Quezon opposed the bill, resulting in rejection by the Philippine Senate by 1934. The U.S. Congress passed the Tidy-McDuffie Act, also known as the Philippine Independence Acts, which provided authority and defined mechanism for the establishment of formal and constitution by constitutional convention. The members of the convention were elected and held their first meeting on July 30, 1934, with Claro M. Recto unanimously elected as president. The Constitution was crafted to meet the approval of the U.S. government and to ensure that U.S. would live up to its promise to grant independence to the Philippines. The Constitution created the Commonwealth of the Philippines, an administrative body that governed the Philippines from 1935 to 1946. So it is a transitional administration to prepare the country towards its full achievement of the independence. So this constitution served as the transitional constitution through the real independence of our country, Philippines, from 1935 to 1946. So the draft of the constitution was approved by the Constitutional Convention on February 8, 1935 and ratified by then U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt on March 25, 1935. So the election were held on September 35 and later on Manuel L. Quezon was elected as the first president of the Commonwealth. Then the Commonwealth was briefly interrupted by the events of World War II with the Japanese occupying the Philippines. So a new constitution the 1942 Constitution was promulgated under the auspice of Japan. So as the war ended, the country reverted to the 1935 Constitution. So the Philippines was declared an independent republic on July 4, 1946, and the Commonwealth Constitution remained in effect. So the next topic we're about to discuss is about the constitutional authoritarianism and the 1973 Constitution, also known as the Marcos Constitution. So in 1965, Ferdinand E. Marcos was selected as the 10th President of the Republic of the Philippines. And in 1967, the Philippine Congress passed a resolution calling for a constitutional convention to change the 1935 Constitution. So after 4 years, in 1969, Marcos won the re-election as the president, and many people said that Ferdinand Marcos used the government funds. So in November 20, 1970, was the first election of the delegates to the Constitutional Convention. So the following on June 1, 1971, the convention formally began. So the former President Carlos P. Garcia was elected as the convention president, and unfortunately later on he died, and it was succeeded by another former president, Diosdado Macapagal. Before the convention finished its work, martial law was declared. Marcos cited a growing communist insurgency as a reason for martial law, which was provided for in the 1935 Constitution. Some delegates of the ongoing Constitutional Convention were placed behind bars, while others went into hiding or voluntary exile. With Marcos as a dictator, the direction of the convention turned, with accounts that the president himself dictated some provision of the Constitution, manipulating the document to be able to hold onto the power for as long as he could. On November 29, 1972, the convention approved its proposed constitution. The 1970 Constitution, composed of a preamble and 17 articles, provides for the shift from parliamentary system of government. The draft of 1970 Constitution was submitted to the citizen as a successful ratification. So, on January 17, 1973, President Marcos issued a proclamation number 1102 in which he announced that the Constitution of the 1973 had been ratified by the majority. The 1970 Constitution was supposed to introduce a parliamentary-style government where legislative power was vested in a unicameral National Assembly, with the members of being elected to a term of 6 years. The president was to be elected as the symbolic and ceremonial head of state chosen from the members of the National Assembly. The president would serve a 6 year term and could be re-elected to an unlimited number of terms. Executive power is relegated to the Prime Minister, who is also the head of the government and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. The Prime Minister was also to be elected from the National Assembly. And the fate of the nation under the 1970 Constitution was rather shaky under the imperial presidency of Marcos, who fell out of power after the famous EDSA Revolution of 1986. The 1986 Provisional Freedom Constitution. So Corazon Aquino, the newly elected president, issued the Proclamation Number 3 on March 25, 1986, abolishing the 1973 Constitution, the Parliament, the Supreme Court, the Prime Minister's office, and all the national and local positions, establishing a revolutionary government under what she called the Provisional Constitution of the Republic of the Philippines. The ratifying or promulgating body is Corazon Aquino, and it was drafted by Renato Puno, who later became one of the Supreme Court's Chief Justices, and it was declared to be a revolutionary type of government. The Freedom Constitution was effective from March 25, 1986 to February 1, 1987. The last and the current constitution that has been used up until now is the 1987 Philippine Constitution. So on February 11, 1987, the new constitution was proclaimed, ratified, and took effect, establishes the Philippines as a democratic and republican state, where sovereignty resides in the people and all the government authority emanates from them. The 1987 Constitution established a representative democracy with power divided among three separate independent branches of government. the executive, a bicameral legislature, and the judiciary. So there were three independent constitution commission as well as the Commission on Audit, the Civil Service Commission, and the Commission on Election. Integrated into the Constitution was a full Bill of Rights which granted fundamental civil and politics rights and provided for free, fair, and periodic election. After the presidency of Cory Aquino, the following presidents attempts to amend or change the 1987 Constitution. The 1987 Constitution provided three ways by which the Constitution can be amended, all requiring ratification by a majority vote in a national referendum. These modes are Constituent Assembly, a People's Initiative, or a Constitutional Convention. So the first attempt to amend the 1987 Constitution was under President Fidel V. Ramos. So a shift to a parliamentary system and the lifting of terms limits of public officials. So the changes will bring more accountability, continuity, and responsibility to gridlock and a prone Philippine version of the president bicameral system. Many opposed the process that was supposed to lead a national referendum. So on September 21, 1997, a church organized a rally over an estimated half million to Rizal Park. So on September 23, 1997, the petition of the People Initiative is dismissed. The succeeding president, Joseph Ercito Estrada, formed a study commission to investigate the issues surrounding charter change, focusing on the economic and judiciary provision of the Constitution. The process is termed as Concord or Constitutional Correction for Development. The Concord proposal, according to its proponents, would amend only the restrictive economic provision of the Constitution that are considered to impede the entry of more foreign investment in the Philippines. Different entities also blocked this effort. So after President Estrada was replaced by other people power and succeeded by his vice president, Gloria Macapagal Arroyo. Gloria Macapagal Arroyo endorsed a constitutional change through a constituent assembly which entails a two-third vote of the House to propose amendments or revision to the Constitution. This initiative was a loss not successful since the term of President Arroyo was marred in a controversy and scandal including the possibility of Arroyo extending her term as president, which the Constitution does not allow. President Benigno Aquino III had no concrete plans regarding constitutional reform, but several proposals were put forth by different members of the Congress, including the Senate Resolution Number 10 by Senator Coco Pimentel. Senator Coco Pimentel called for a constitutional reform to convert to a federal republic. Belmonte's joint resolution on economic provision. They filed a bill of pushing a federal and a parliamentary government in addition to economic liberalization. Rodrigo Duterte stated in May 2016 that a plebiscite on the proposed replacement of the unitary state with a federal one will be held in 2 years. So after winning, Duterte proposed to revive the proposed form of Nini Pimentel on December 7, 2016. President Duterte signed Executive Order Number 10 creating Consultative Committee or CONCOM to review the 1987 Constitution. Then, on July 3, 2018, the CONCOM unanimously approved the draft constitution through voting. So it was submitted to the President on or before July 9 of the same year. And then, the binding constitution is referring to the Filipino value of communal work. By Duterte and the Consultative Committee, and the proposed federal charter includes the amendments that aims to prohibit elected officials from switching political parties during the first and last 2 years of their term, as a response to the corncoat behavior.
Election of political parties. The political the Philippines has multi-party system with numerous parties in which no one party normally has chance of gaining power alone, and parties must work with each other to form a coalition government. The Commission on Election (COMELEC) is responsible for running the election. What are the historical underpinning of election in the Philippines? The first parliamentary election to the unicameral Bataang Pambansa, the National Parliamentary, was done in 1978, the first presidential election under The 1973 Constitution was done in 1981. A special snap presidential election was held in 1986, which Marcos being declared as the winner. How did the Philippines party system develop and perform? Pilipinas ay may multi-party system na may maraming partidong pampolitika kung saan walang isang partido ang dalasang may pagkatalo. Makuha ng kapangyarihan ng mag-isa at ang mga partido ay dapat magtulungan sa isa't isa upang bumuo ng mga pamalaang qualification para sa pampolitikang kapakinabangan at kaginawaan. What are the some of the pressing issues surrounding the Philippines electoral and party system? Ito ang sistema ng electoral o sistema ng pagboto ay isang hanay ng mga tuntunin sa tumutukoy kung paano isinagawa ang mga halalan at referendum at kung paano tinutukoy ang mga resulta ng mga ito. The electoral system. The electoral system or voting system is a set of rules that determine how election and conduct referendum and how the result are determined. An example for winner-take-all plurality voting. Sistema itong ginagamit sa antas ng estado para sa halalan ng karamihan sa electoral college sa mga halalan sa pagkapangulo ng estado. Ang sistemang ito ay tinatawag na party block voting na tinatawag ding pangkalahatiang ticket. Cumulative and senator elected at large. The Senate shall be composed of the 24 senators which shall be elected at large by the qualified voters. The Philippines as may be provided by law. Extensions of legislative district and local government units. Ito ang paglikha ng mga LGU o ang mga conversion ito mula sa isang antas tungo sa isang pang-antas ay dapat na nakabantay sa nabibaryapi ng mga tagapagpahiwatig ng kakayahang mabuhay at inaasahang kapasidad magbigay ng mga serbisyo kita sa populasyon at lupain. Electorate duly registered citizens 18 years of age and above, in which your right to vote was given to all citizens who are 18 years of age or more. Pre-colonial Philippines. The Philippines pre-colonial period was filled with indigenous people engaged in healthy trade with various culture. No election for ruling authorized. Ito ang halalan para sa mga posisyon sa executive department ng gobyerno ng Pilipinas. Ang mga pangulo at pangalawang pangulo ay kinukontrol ng Artikulo 8, Section 4 ng 1987 Constitution ng Pilipinas. Government was based more on intangible asset are important source of strong competitive advantage for business and control to creating customer values and will assure stakeholder values. For example, ang mga peasant ay tumutulong sa mga negosyo protektahan ang kanilang mga imbensyon mula sa hindi pagsasamantala. Kinship. The kinship is a culturally defined relationship between individuals who are commonly true as having family ties. Custom tradition. Ito ay ang tradisyon ay isang paniniwala o pag-ugali na ipinasa sa loob ng isang grupo o lipunan na may simbolong kahulugan o espesyal na kahulugan na may mga pinagmulan sa nakaraan. American colonial rule set the foundation for election in the Philippines. Government, institution, and the electoral system were patterned after the American system. Filipino could run for public office in limited capacity. Kolonyalisasyon ng mga American sa Pilipino ay 48 taon. Nagsimula ito sa pagpapadala ng Pilipinas sa United States ng Espanya noong 1898 at tumagal hanggang sa pagkilala ng United States sa kalayuan ng Pilipinas noong 1946. Commonwealth introduced a more accommodating system. Over time, Philippines election were dominated by a single party. Once national parties in office, the Partido Federal ng Pilipinas is the ruling party and the leader of the administration coalition, while the Akbayan Citizens Action Party is the main opposition party and the leader of the opposition coalition. Creation of the COMELEC to oversee the conduct of election. Ito ang commission election as nilikas sa pamagitan ng mga 1940 amendment sa 1935 Constitution. Ang mga kasapi nito ay pinalawak ng 1973 at 1987 Constitution. Ang commission ay gumagamit ng hindi lamang administratibo kundi pang hukuman mala orisal na kapangyarihan. 1973 Constitution. The Philippines Constitution plebiscite of 1973 occurred from 10 to 15, which ratified the 1973 Constitution of the Philippines. Consolidation of power under the martial rule. Ito ang sa ilalim ng batas militar na gawa ng rehimen sa bawasan ang marahas na krimen sa lungsod, pangulikta ng mga hindi arestadong baril at supilin ang komunikistang insursiya ng ibang lugar. Waking of the powers of the COMELEC. The Commission on Election is the premier guardian of the ballot. Its principal role is to enforce and administer all law and regulation related to the conduct of election, privileges, integrative referendums, and recalls. Pilipino could run for public office in a limited capacity. Dapat marunong kang bumasa at sumulat. Dapat din 14 taon gulang sa araw ng halalan at dapat din ay manirahan din sa Pilipinas 10 taon bago ang halalan. Lack of checks and balance within the electoral system. Balance system provide each branch of government with individual powers to check the other branches and prevent any one branch from becoming too powerful. The Filipino party system. American colonial rules. Dominance of the Federal Party advocating Philippines statehood within the United States. Rise and subsequent preponderance of the Nationalist Party, coalition of different groups advocating Philippines independence. The Filipino party system. Post-war period. Split of the Liberal Party from the Nationalist Party, encouraged by the American to avoid single-party ceremony. Ito ang nagharing partido na nananatili sa kapangyarihan para sa higit sa isang pagkakasunod na termino ay maaaring ituring ng isang nangibabaw din bilang bilang partido. Over time, the distinction between the two become blurred, something that you cannot see clearly. Growing importance of personalities. The personalities development help you gain recognition and acceptance from the society as well as people around. Na ang pagpapaunlad ng personalidad ay gumaganap ng mahalagang papel hindi lamang sa professional na isang individual kundi pati na rin sa personal na buhay. Ginagawa nitong disiplinado maagap at asset ang isang individual para sa kanyang organization. Martial law. A martial law is the imposition of direct military control of normal civil function or suspension of civil law by a government, especially in response to an emergency where civil forces are overheld or in an occupied territory. Ang martial law o batas militar sa Pilipinas ay isang paraan ng pamamala na kung saan ang pamala o gobyerno ay direktang ipinasa ilalim sa kapangyarihan ng mga militar. Dito binibigyan ng kapangyarihan ang militar na pamumuno gumawa ng desisyon para sa ikakabuti ng mga mamamayan. Clamp down on political institutions, the bodies which make up the whole mechanisms of modern government such as heads of state, legislators, and parties are known as political institutions. Rise of the kilusang bagong lipunan, KBL, as the dominant political party. Ay ibig sabihin ay bagong lipunan ay ang alamat ng bagong lipunan na nangangahulugang bagong lipunan sa mga pirang papel ay sinasagisag ng bagong lipunan noon ni Pangulong Marcos na nagmarka sa panahon ng mga reforma sa strukturang panlipunan, pang-ekonomiya at pangpolitika ng gobyerno. Electoral emergence of regional political parties and development of multi-party system. EDSA 1986, the People Power Revolution gathered millions of Filipinos from walk of life to march along Epifanio de los Santos Avenue. EDSA, the main artery of the Metro Manila, to end the dictatorship of President Ferdinand E. Marcos and begin the new marked by true freedom and democracy.
Government peace treaties with Muslim Filipinos. Lesson overview. The origins of the Mindanao conflict can be traced back to the 16th century when the native Moro of the islands resisted invading Spanish forces. This conflict between the capital in Manila and Moro Mindanao. Separatism or Muslim nationalism was first expressed through the Moro independence movement. The MIM was founded in May 1968 in the wake of Zaveda Massacre, also called the Corregidor Massacre, in which the armed forces of the Philippines killed an unknown number of Moro Muslims who had been trained as soldiers for a coming military operation. Project and the reason for the execution of the Muslim recruits have never been made clear. The most widely repeated interpretation was that the project was part of the Marcos administration plan to invade the Malaysian state of Sabah on the island of Borneo by a force from Sulu that could not be directly linked with the Philippine Army. Sa parehong taon ng batas militar ay diniklara ni Pangulong Ferdinand Marcos na nagpapataas ng tensyon at tumantong sa digmaang MNLF noong 1973 hanggang 1977. Mahigit 13,000 katao ang namatay habang mahigit 1 milyon ang tumakas sa kanilang mga tahanan. Ang diktadorang Marcos na halos nagsimula ng digmaan ay gumugol ng $1 milyong dolyar sa isang araw upang pigilan ang rebelyon. Isang pinansyal na pag-ubos sa pondo ng gobyerno, naging militarisado ang Mindanao habang ang mga Muslim ay hiwalay sa estado. Ang mga gastos sa digmaan at panlabas ng interbisyon ay nagpilit sa magkabilang panig na sumang-ayon sa usapang pangkapayapaan noong 1975. The founder and one disputed leaders of the MNLF is Nur Mirswari. The MNLF was founded as a splinter group of the Muslim Independence Movement on October 21, 1972. Nang humiling ang MNLF para sa pagkilala at tulong sa kanilang paghahanap ng kalayaan noong 1974, tinanggap ng OIC ang delegasyon. Kinilala nila ang kilusan ng pagsasarili ng MNLF sa pamamagitan ng pagbibigay ng grupong tagamasid ng katayuan ng komprehensya, habang ang mga membro ng OIC ay nagbanta sa gobyerno ng Pilipinas na may negatibong epekto kung ito ay tumanggi na makisali sa mga negosasyon at mabibigo ang magkaroon ng isang kasunduan ng kapayapaan. The MNLF disputed President Aquino's intent to create an autonomous region for Muslim Mindanao. By including it in the country's new constitution, they argued that the basis for autonomy should be the Tripoli Agreement and not the new constitution. So the signing of the Jeddah Accord also further alienated the MILF since they were not included in the talks. The OIC proceeded with its mediation of the peace talk with the new president elected in 1992, Fidel B. Ramos. So at the signing of the final peace agreement between the government of the Republic of the Philippines and the Moro National Liberation Front on September 2, 1996. So the 4 rounds of talks from October 1993 to August 1996 resulted in the signing of the final peace agreement, created the Southern Philippine Council for Peace and Development as a provisional autonomous government of the ERMM, which included the 13 provinces in the Tripoli Agreement. So there are 2 phases for the implementation of the agreement were outlined. First, the establishment of the SPCPD, the creation of the Special Zone of the Peace and Development, and the Consultative Assembly. Second is a referendum to determine the establishment of the new autonomous government in Mindanao. The peace talk with the MNLF finally ended after almost 2 decades. President Joseph Estrada declared an all-out war against the MILF on March 21, 2000. So, in the 2000 Philippine campaign against the Moro Islamic Liberation Front was a military campaign conducted by the Armed Forces of the Philippines against a Muslim secessionist group that took place during the presidency of Joseph Estrada and the Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao in the Philippines. The campaign was waged to weaken the Moro Islamic Liberation Front's capability to undermine the territorial integrity of the Philippines and inflict harm on both government personnel and civilians. Noong 2001, nasangkot ang Malaysia sa pamamagitan ng usapang pangkapayapaan sa imbitasyon ni dating Pangulong Gloria Macapagal Arroyo at pagsang-ayon ng MILF. The positive attitude toward Malaysia by both parties was rooted in the fact that Malaysia, while having a majority Islamic population, also hosted many non-Muslim citizens and depicted an example that Islam can coexist peacefully with the other regions. In 2010, a new Philippine president was elected, Benigno C. Aquino III, son of a former President Corazon Aquino. He initiated exploratory talks with the MILF in 2011, and the peace talk resumed with Malaysia once again, mediating on 15 October 2012. On March 27, 2014, the Comprehensive Agreement on the Bangsamoro or CAB was signed by the parties, which included the plans to establish the new autonomous region to replace ERMM. To create the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, the Bangsamoro Basic Law was proposed in Congress, but it failed to gain traction and languish in Congress as the Mamasapana incident took place in January 2015. In an operation to kill a Malaysian militant named Marwan, the Special Action Force or the SAF of the Philippine National Police (PNP) clashed with the Bangsamoro Islamic Freedom Fighters or BIFF. Killing 44 SAF personnel, President Aquino's term ended without a Bangsamoro Basic Law. President Duterte signed the Bangsamoro Organic Law on July 26, 2018 after asking for 48 hours during his SUNA to review the bill. The passing of BBL will set a precedent for federalism as pushed by the administration.